Morning, Doug. Today I want to talk to you about language and specifically the way our language is being corrupted. Now, I was slow to accepting this idea. I remember years ago, maybe more than a decade ago, hearing you describe, you were actually talking about Bush the second and talking about him as whether he was whether he was an idiot or stupid or a moron or something like that. And you were very careful in going through and defining the terms. And I thought it was like pedantic in a way, like it was unnecessary. But it's so obvious now that I was completely wrong. Language is being corrupted in real time, and we can see it all for ourselves. Uh, you've seen it for a while now, though. You've known it was coming. What does this mean to you?
Yeah, that's right. I read Orwell's 1984 when I was in high school, and it was a great book. Maybe I should read it again, but on the other hand, there's so many good books to read. Uh, can you take the time to, I know the essence, I still remember the essence of 1984 very well. And of course, there are a lot of themes in it, but one of the themes that Orwell emphasized was the total upending of the language, turning everything around where what you say is actually the opposite of what you mean. So that when you do that, when languages, Orwell made a point of it by turning everything exactly on its head, where the ministry of love was actually the ministry of hate, and the
Right.
ministry of truth was the ministry of lies, and so forth. Okay, that's very good. He needed to make that point that way. But, that trend is insinuated in 1,000 ways today. And I would say more than anybody else, George Carlin has taken up the banner of George Orwell. And I presume that almost everybody listening to this now has Googled, or I should say, YouTubed George Carlin and look around for what George says about language, because he's just absolutely brilliant on this. And, I want to second that emotion. It's that when you use words inaccurately, people get the wrong impression of what you mean, or they think something else, or they don't know what you're talking about. Or if you don't use words accurately, it shows that actually you don't know what you're talking about. So that's why, just for your own purposes of intellectual clarity, you've got to define words carefully for your own benefit, not to mention the benefit of the people you're talking to. So it's interesting
One of
when,
Orwell's key things was that I remember, and I don't think this wasn't written directly about in 1984. It was more in one of his essays about this topic. Is he talked about this idea of that when language was made to be insincere, that's where everything started to fall apart. Where you could use words that were not when language was not designed specifically to more accurately communicate ideas, but in fact to be naturally less sincere, that corruption become insidious. And I, of course, he talks about an animal farm as well as 1984, but it's so obvious now. And I sent you a couple of recent examples of this with where we see in the AP style book, which is this is what reporters use, and a lot of people use it as writers just to know what should we be calling things or what should we not be calling things. And there's some we get to see this in real time. And I know one that we just briefly talked about was the term riot, because as we had around the country, we had mostly peaceful protests all year. What are your thoughts on that and how they've changed the language around that?
well, I thought about riot and how many synonyms do we have for riot, actually? Uh, there must be other ways of expressing what happens or what a riot is perceived as. So I went to a thesaurus, and the first thing that was listed, of course, these were in alphabetical order, so it's not that bad, but they listed anarchy as being a synonym for riot. And this is a pet bugaboo of mine. It's that everybody thinks of anarchists as running around in black capes with little round bombs that are lit and being destructive and violent and wild and crazy. And of course, in the thesaurus, anarchy is equated to riot. And of course, in point of fact, anarchy is the gentlest and most peaceful of all social systems. But, that word has been pretty much captured by the bad guys and turned on its head.
Turned to mean the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
It
it
means
just
literally
means
the
no
opposite.
state. And since the state is actually congealed coercion and violence, it's all about force. It's the state ought to be here somehow when it talks about riot. But, well, I guess the state does keep order in the same way that a pressure cooker keeps order by keeping the lid on while pressure's building. So what else? The second thing they had is a brawl. That's not right for a riot, because a brawl is like a barroom fight or an altercation on a street corner. And a riot is more substantial and tends to have political overtones. So these synonyms that they use, anarchy, no, that's not a good synonym at all for a riot. Brawl, nope, not good. Disturbance, well, a riot is a really substantial disturbance.
It's a big disturbance.
Yeah, a disturbance can be like, the neighbor having his TV up too loud, or the
Exactly.
or
Dog barking.
Yeah, so that's not a good synonym either. Lawlessness. A riot is lawlessness. Not really. Lawlessness. We'd have to discuss really what's the nature of law and so forth. And okay, protest. Well, this is the synonym that the current
AP style guide
writers
likes, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I guess mostly peaceful protest. No, a riot isn't a protest, actually. A storm. I don't know how that fit in there. That's a meteorological term. Strife. Well, yeah, strife, but that's not a good synonym either for a riot. Trouble. That's turbulence. Turbulence. It's not turmoil, uproar. It's funny, and I thought about it, and I wonder if we really don't have another word for riot. And so, what is a riot? It's a massive, generally. Although the dictionary defines riot, I looked at that as an uproar or disturbance. I should actually go back to the definition, but I don't have that open now. Of 3 or more people. So 2 people can't riot, but apparently 3 can. So it sounds like, some law enforcement official was parsing the word.
Yeah, so the definition of riot I have here is, and this is just from what Google takes me to, which is from Oxford Dictionary, apparently. Riot is defined as a violent disturbance of the peace by a crowd.
Okay. I think that's a pretty good definition. What do you think?
I think that's pretty good, but let me tell you what the EAP said. So if you're on Twitter at all, following the AP style book is really interesting. I think if you like language and you like the way, and you want to see how it's being changed in real time, this is a great way to see it. So this is new guidance that they issued on September 30th. It says, use care in deciding which term best applies. A riot is a wild or violent disturbance of peace involving a group of people. The term riot suggests uncontrolled chaos and pandemonium. Focusing on rioting and property destruction rather than underlying grievance has been used in the past to stigmatize broad swaths of people protesting against lynching, police brutality, or for racial justice, going back to the urban uprisings of the 1960s. Unrest is vaguer, milder, and less emotional term for a condition of angry discontent and protesting verging on revolt. Let's see, there's a couple more parts here. Protest and demonstration refer to specific actions such as marches, sit-ins, rallies, or other actions meant to register dissent. They can be legal or illegal, organized or spontaneous, peaceful or violent, and involve any number of people. Revolt and uprising both suggest a broader political dimension or civil upheavals, a sustained period of protests or unrest against powerful groups of governing systems. So basically, they're trying to encourage people to use terms more like unrest or demonstration, because they would consider basically a lot of the riots that we experienced, they would qualify as a protest or demonstration, is what they change it to.
Yeah, people seem to like to use euphemisms today, which soften things. But I like definitions that have hard, precise edges when we can get them. So I don't like euphemisms. Euphemisms are okay if you're trying to be cynical or snide or trying to make fun of somebody. But I don't like euphemisms because I like to call a spade a spade. And these changes in the language make it very hard to say what you mean and very hard to mean what you say because the words are so imprecise. And of course, one of the objectives of the regime that Big Brother was running was to reduce the number of words in the English language. There are about 1 million words in the English language, roughly speaking. So Big Brother was trying to reduce them to as few as possible. I think Orwell even said 500 words were really all you needed. That's probably correct because if you have 500 words, you can communicate almost everything you need. Sit, stand, walk, run, eat, bunch of nouns,
Right.
a few pronouns. Of course, pronouns are on their way out too.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even things though that like are, I think it gets to Orwell's idea of making language less sincere though. Euphemism fundamentally makes it less sincere because it basically dilutes the power of the word, the clarity of the word. And one of the things, in the AP style book that they did this year is they want to change the way you talk about older people. They say that terms, they think that these terms can be offensive to use terms like quote elderly and quote senior citizen. So they don't want to refer to people as elderly anymore.
Yeah, well, how are you supposed to refer to them? I mean, look, the facts are the facts, okay? I mean, what it is it's about denying reality. That's part of it, actually. And these people like to disguise what they're doing by saying, well, you want to be polite with people. Yes, you do want to be polite, but being polite is very different from what they're doing. I mean, I don't like to insult anybody unless I want to insult them, quite frankly. I forget whose definition this is, but it's obviously 19th century English. A gentleman was defined as someone who never offends unintentionally. So the point made with that is there's nothing wrong with offending people. Some people deserve to be offended. And, frankly, if you're old and or ugly and or stupid, I mean, you don't have to draw this to people's attention in a way that hurts them. I mean, that's pointless unless you don't like them and you're actually trying. But you should do that. And you should have they're trying to expunge a whole class of words. Like you can't be fat anymore. Okay. Right. Well, yeah, sometimes, if somebody's fat, they're fat. And whether you use fat or slightly corpulent or something like that, it depends on what your relationship is with the person. And so what? You don't want to be unintentionally offensive. And I prefer to be polite for all kinds of reasons. But these people are dangerous on a really basic level. I mean, it's like they're denying physical reality.
Hmm.
So it's actually much more insidious than it appears at first. They're not being polite. They're denying reality and trying to give people a feeling of cognitive dissonance,
Mm.
which is, I guess it's called gaslighting today,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which I guess the classic example of gaslighting is in that movie where the guy's laying in bed with this girl and his wife walks in and she says, "What are you doing there? Who's that girl in your bed?" And he looks at her and says, "What girl? What are you talking about?" "That girl. What are you talking about?" This goes on. "Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?" So I guess that's called gaslighting. And that's exactly what these people are doing with the language. And they are really, I've got to say, not just misguided, they're actually evil on a very basic level. It's quite disturbing.
It seems like, so when thinking about it through that framework, it seems like a lot of the more subtle changes in language just make gaslighting easier. They aren't directly gaslighting, but it makes it easier. So using the example of the wife walking in on her husband in bed with another woman, like it's like the changes in language are the equivalent of turning the lights off or turning the lights down. So you have greater plausible deniability. There's just greater level of confusion there. You know, just like they don't want to use we want to use older person and not elderly to describe people. So there's just so people aren't really clear because an older person could be depending on who you're talking to, could be a 40-year-old if you're talking to a 20-year-old, or it could be a 80-year-old, but it's not clear. And I think the gender neutral language is another one, which they want to, as much as possible, they want to get rid of terms like manhunt and instead call it a search. Like if there's a manhunt for a fugitive or whatever, and you probably wouldn't even call him a fugitive now. I don't even know what the right word for that would be. A fugitive. That's probably inappropriate. But
Well, you're not supposed to say policemen or firemen because that's too gender specific.
right.
But, frankly, the idea of women being firemen, I think it's actually kind of stupid because the fact is that men, everything else being anywhere near equal, are just bigger and stronger than women. And being a fireman, you need to be strong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want women as firemen. In fact, I don't really want women as soldiers. If it was my unit, I mean, maybe if it was a truly exceptional woman, okay. I guess a woman that has a couple of extra Y chromosomes hanging around there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. There's always exceptions to these things, but having too many women, or maybe any women in the military, and certainly in combat roles, just like firemen, policemen, a little bit different. Sometimes women can defuse the
Definitely.
situation in a way that
Yeah.
men can't. But the fact that these people make laws and rules about these things is very destructive.
Yeah, I think especially, I mean, just my opinion on the women in the army or in as fire people, I guess you would say, or fire persons, because if the standards of this, if the physical standards are exactly the same, and there are some really tough women out there who they spend, if you ever watch these CrossFit competitions, the women in there are, I mean, they would just whoop our ass, Doug. But
Yeah,
then
no, there's no
if
question about that.
if that's the case, then that's cool. But like if you change the standards, for it in order to be equitable, then I think that's
Well, you know
that's
what? I have a solution to this problem, and that is if everything was privatized, you make up your rules for your fire company.
right.
You can hire whoever you want. I mean, you can hire all, you know, black uh, uh, quadriplegic midgets if you want for your fire company.
If you can find them, I think there's not a great supply, but
Yeah, exactly. So the way to solve this problem is just let the market solve it.
that's
I
right.
mean, and nobody's owed a job or nobody's owed a title or anything. And this is something that in a civil society, people work out with each other. We don't need legislators telling us what to call things and what not to call things. I mean, if what you do or say all the time is inappropriate for the circumstances, and that has to be determined too, well, then you're well known as a jerk, and the market will reward you or not. But
Yeah.
it's not a political problem, and these people make everything political.
They do, but one of the things that really bothers me about these changes in language is that these aren't coming by dictate of the government. I mean, this is the AP style guide is altering language right in front of us to just, and I know they're responding to political events, but it's like, I don't know. It seems like a concerted effort from a lot of different people to just dull thinking by dulling language.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this happened with John Maynard Keynes. Uh, Interesting person, said some interesting things other than what he's famous for. And he said something to the effect of most people in the world are unaware how under the influence of some defunct economist that they are. And it's true. And these people, the utopian socialists, actually figured this out 150 years ago, that the way to change society was to capture academia. And you train kids who have a tabula rasa mind in a lot of ways, and you fill it with things, and then they impart that to the next generation. It's what they think is right. It's the education they paid for by authority figures. And yeah, you can corrupt the whole society that way. And by God, they've really succeeded. And it's not just academia. It's the corporations and the media and the entertainment business. And of course, if all your friends think a certain way, you don't want to be the oddball out. I usually was. Didn't bother me too much, but that's not true of most people, I don't think.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard being the odd man out. So I think we pretty much lost the battle. I think we've lost the battle for language, frankly. I mean, I'll still point these things out, and people say, well, you're being pedantic. And then we can get into a nice discussion. Well, no, it's not about pedantry at all. It's about honesty.
Yeah, I think it's important that more of us do that. And I mean, that you have to, with anything, you have to pick and choose your battles. You don't want to, there's certain words in the language that are so outside of the norm that it's not worth fighting for those, I don't think anymore. But like, it might be worth fighting for the word anarchy, for example. Like, it might be worth it because you need an opposite of state that show and in its natural form, it is peaceful. It is about peace. The most peaceful form of human interaction on a political basis with each other. And it's the opposite of statist. And I think, which is bad. And I think you need an opposite of that. Like Orwell, one of his biggest things, he wanted to get rid of synonyms and antonyms. If you had a word for good, why do you need a word for its opposite? He said, and like, it's why? Because you can't imagine its opposite if you don't have a word for its opposite.
That's right. It's hard to think about something if you don't have a word for it. That's exactly correct. Yeah, it results in confusion. It results in a Tower of Babel. It results in chaos, which incidentally is a word which is almost always conflated with anarchy, but is actually the opposite of anarchy. It's funny. Today at 4:00 Eastern, since my 2 luncheon groups in Aspen have been canceled, maybe forever, there's another guy who I don't know him who decided he was going to start a Zoom luncheon group. And so I got invited to this thing. I don't know who else is going to it, but they have a particular topic of events. and we're supposed to talk about. And every one of these events is has all kinds of political and economic nuances. And I got a feeling that even after this first meeting that I'm going to, I'm not going to be invited back. And it's for exactly that reason that, I don't even get invited to dinner parties in Aspen anymore.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm impolite. I'm always polite, unless I really dislike the person, which if it's not my house, I don't want to create a dust up anyway. But, you can't talk about anything important anymore without stepping on somebody's hot button. And they explode when you do that.
Yeah.
It's very hard to have a pleasant conversation where the two of you try to reach what the truth might be, or at least understand what kind of a person you're dealing with.
Yeah.
This is why, incidentally, talking about words, I endorse hate speech.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impolite. Should only be used in certain circumstances, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not going to tell anybody not to use hate speech. Why? I'm interested in what's going on in the other person's mind. And if he can't use hate speech, how do I know what he really feels like? You don't know. And that's dangerous.
It's really dangerous. And who determines what hate speech is? Like that's a very slippery slope. And I'm I guess a speech purist. And I want to hear what people have to say. I want them to be able to say whatever it is they want to say.
Yeah, and it's good mental discipline, and it makes life more interesting because you can actually have sincere and honest and intelligent conversations when you examine these things. So yeah, I completely. But listen, we've lost the battle. I don't mean you and I in particular, but I mean people that feel this way. I mean, we're really being overwhelmed by numbers.
Well, is there one, just to kind of wrap this up, is there one twisting of the language that stands out to you as being particularly irritating to you? Is there one phrase or one word that, is no longer used, or you think is been turned into double speak of some kind that stands out?
Well, it's hard to pick one out of so many, but as you mentioned that, what popped into my mind, so I guess it's probably the one, is the word liberal. Now, it used to be a liberal, because it comes from the Latin liber, which means free. It was one that believed in free speech and free markets and free thought and just political freedom generally, intellectual freedom as well. And that's been totally turned around. 19th century liberal is today a libertarian. And today a liberal is a statist who doesn't believe in any of these values. So they've totally captured and turned that word upside down, and it's most annoying. And I don't like the word conservative particularly either, because it's kind of a floating abstraction. A conservative is one who conserves. Well, what's he conserving? I guess he's conserving the status quo. Well, you can say that's good or bad, but it's morally ambivalent or morally neutral. A conservative in Soviet Russia, was that a good thing?
Right, exactly.
I mean, what's a conservative today conserving, actually? I mean, the current state of affairs, is that anything worth defending?
Yeah.
So all these words are sloppy and mushy.
But I think that's why conservatives are probably have been losing ground over decades to liberals, because liberal at least still conjures in your mind, ignore the reality of what liberalism has become. Liberal conjures in your mind believing in people, believing in freedom. I mean, and so that they have that brand still, but they've, like in Orwell's with doublespeak, they've taken over that brand, and that brand means the exact opposite of what the brand has traditionally stood for.
It's very clever. And of course, the conservatives, or the Republicans in today's world, who stand for absolutely nothing, quite frankly, they're all like Mitt Romney or Bob Dole or John McCain or people like that. they stand for nothing but, well, yeah, you're right, but let's not go so far. Let's not go so fast.
Exactly.
Let's slow it down a little bit. They have no principles. At least the liberals and the socialists and the communists have principles. And people like to have principles. That's why they go to church, and that's why they have religions. They like
Mhm.
something to believe in, and the liberals give them that. They're all bad ideas, but at least it's something to believe in. The Republicans are nothing but a reaction to
Yeah.
something. They don't believe in
Reactionaries.
anything.
I agree
It's
completely.
yeah.
Yeah.
The situation is hopeless. Question
It's
is how serious is it?
exactly. Well, I think it's like I said, it took me a long time to really to recognize how critical it was, the effort that you took to make sure terms were well defined among your audience, the people who are listening to what you said when you were on stage or in your books or wherever else. But now it seems like it's difficult to enter into any difficult conversation for sure without forcing people to define what exactly they mean by what they're saying. And so I think just taking the time and forcing that issue with people really can make it so that you can come to some understanding together. If you don't force the definition of terms, you're never going to find it.
You're absolutely right. And very, very few people do that today. But I guess if you and I do it, I mean, you got to be true to yourself. And I don't give a damn about those other chimpanzees.
I don't either. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it.